Since the accession to the throne of the new king of Great Britain, Charles III, a wave of pride has swept through certain circles of Romanian society. Newspapers are competing to publish genealogies that imagine Charles as a descendant of Vlad the Impaler, Dracula. Unrealistic or even outright fictional genealogies have been constructed by all monarchs. You see, there is this deep-seated and persistent longing in all of us to connect our family lineage to a legendary and prestigious ancestor. In Germany, the particular historical obsession is with Charlemagne, whereas for the British, it's with the infamous Dracula. One of them, Bram Stoker, invented him as a vampire in 1897, while another, a contemporary of ours, parades the historical figure behind the grotesque character. Should Romanians then follow suit in their desire to feel flattered? In our opinion, the reasons for pride and Charles's merits should be sought elsewhere entirely. Greetings, my name is Adrian Gheorghe. I am a doctor of history, and along with Albert Weber, another doctor you see less often, I am part of the international research team Corpus Draculianum. Before we get started, I have a big favor to ask. We are a community of over 5,000 friends of His Highness. Help the group double its numbers by the end of the year. The idea is simple: daily propaganda. Your mission from now on is to recruit anyone from your family, friends, not enemies, acquaintances, or colleagues. Thank you for the wonderful things you do for this channel. King Charles III's ties to Romania are different from those imagined by some. Stay with us until the end, and you will find out the real reasons. Until then, let's debunk the nonsense of the tabloid journalists. To begin with, it is important to clarify that journalists were certainly not the ones who invented this family tree. According to our extensive research, the actual person responsible for this is David Hughes, a self-proclaimed British historian who is perhaps better described as a writer and novelist. He apparently invented King Charles III's genealogy in his book on British dynasties, published in the early 2000s. How seriously should Hughes's research be taken? A few examples of genealogical mastery, which you'll laugh at in a moment, prove it to us. So don't wonder anymore where these internet aberrations come from. This is what happens when everyone thinks they're an historian. Tocomerius, the father of Basarab I, was supposedly a Tatar, descended from Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson. The Briton invents a daughter for the impaler named Zelenska, a curious name otherwise unattested anywhere in Romanian medieval onomastics. Even more interesting are Hughes's prophetic aberrations, as he was likely thinking of Zelensky and his wife Zelenska, back when they weren't known at all. Basarab Tepelos is listed as Tepes' son, though in reality he was his mortal enemy. Hughes doesn't just make up fictional family members, he also completely forgets some, like Alisandra, Vlad the Impaler's sister, who was married to a boyar from Dambovita. Furthermore, he also merges Eupraxia, the mother of Vlad the Monk, who eventually became a monk, with the person of Lady Caltuna of Braila, a woman known for her very dubious and questionable reputation. You can probably see where I'm going with this. I could go on for hours with such nonsense. Hughes claims there are three distinct genealogical pathways through which the British royal family could be linked to Vlad the Impaler. Line A, through Vlad, a son of Vlad the Impaler, who was born in the Kingdom of Hungary in the 1470s and founded the Drăculești line of Sintesti. Line B, through the lineage of Mihnea the Evil, his daughter Ruxandra, and then his grandsons Milos II and Peter the Lame. Line C, through the descendants of Vlad the Monk, who was Vlad the Impaler's half-brother, specifically Radu the Great and Mircea the Shepherd. If the Basarab dynasty's links to the kings of England were truly as obvious as they seem, do you think Romanian historians would have overlooked the opportunity to fill entire libraries with books on the subject? In his many studies on Romanian-English relations, Paul Cernovodeanu sees not even the slightest hint. But let's give the floor to the late and highly respected medievalist Constantin Rezachevici for the Dracula genealogy. Historical records and sources clearly indicate that Vlad the Impaler had a Wallachian concubine and two noble Hungarian wives. From these relationships, 3 sons resulted. The first of these, born to the anonymous concubine, is Mihnea the Evil, However, his descendants died out in the first half of the 17th century. Interestingly, Mihnea the Turkified, his great-great-grandson, had a harem after his conversion to Islam in 1591, resulting in 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Based on what is currently known so far, we can't say for sure what direct descendants they had, but it's not entirely impossible that the Turkish line of the Drăculești has descendants to this very day. Maybe Erdogan is Vlad's grandson, but you can be sure the new sultan on the Bosphorus will never brag or boast about it. The second son of Vlad the Impaler, whose specific name remains lost to history, was born to his first wife, whose name is unknown and who originally came from the noble Mihnea family. However, this son died very young, less than 10 years after his father, after having become a Catholic priest. The third son from the same mother and named Vlad retired with his family to Cândești in Transylvania after failing in his attempt to become voivode. The Drăculești line from Cândești eventually became extinct in the middle of the 17th century. The family tree of Vlad the Monk, who was the half-brother of Vlad the Impaler, is extraordinarily intricate and difficult to trace, but his direct male line descendants had all died out by the middle of the 17th century. It is certainly within the realm of possibility that female line descendants existed later on, with their historical traces potentially leading further toward Moldova rather than toward Hungary and England. The lineage of Petru Cercel, who was perhaps the most prominent of these late descendants, also eventually died out around the middle of that very same 17th century. Probably because he found himself getting even more out of his depth there, Hughes did not take into serious consideration a possible descent from Radu the Handsome, who was Vlad the Impaler's younger brother. From this specific line, the only descendants who can be accurately traced in history are those from the marriage of Radu's daughter, the dark-eyed Maria Voichița, to Stephen the Great. From this royal marriage came, among several others, Bogdan III the One-Eyed, who eventually succeeded his father to the throne. His direct descendants, however, eventually died out in the early years of the 18th century. The historical sources thus indicate that all legitimate and remaining Christian male line descendants of Vlad the Impaler died out over a period of 80 years until the very start of the 18th century. And if they truly died out, then no solid connection based on official documentation and not on mere speculation can be made with the British kings of the 20th century. It is widely acknowledged that illegitimate or female line descendants could potentially have existed, but no one knows their names and fates up until this moment. Least of all Hughes and the sensation seekers. Perhaps future research will help us to uncover more information. Surprisingly, perhaps for some, but there were various noble families in Hungary who actively worked and dedicated substantial amounts of money to carefully fabricate their descent from Dracula. There were 2 primary reasons for this. From the 16th through to the 18th centuries, the highly favorable and enduring portrayal of the voivode from Antonio Bonfini's chronicle was widely received in Hungary. This account described him as brutal, but also as an exceptionally courageous and relentless warrior against the Ottomans, and no less a dedicated seeker of justice for his own people. Secondly, being able to claim descent from such a voivode exponentially raised a noble's social status. Such prestigious origins were simply collected, often based on historical documents that were considered at the very least highly questionable. It was therefore quite fashionable in pre-modern Hungary to proudly and publicly proclaim to everyone that you were a direct descendant of the legendary Dracula. An amusing example is the humanist of Romanian origin Nicolae Olahus, who struggled for several decades to have his Dracula blood recognized. His father, a Wallachian boyar wandering in Transylvania, supposedly had some obscure kinship ties with the Basarab dynasty. Only through ennoblement could Olahus pursue a political career in the Kingdom of Hungary. The German emperor eventually yielded to Olahus's requests, granting him 2 diplomas of nobility, in which Dracula is explicitly mentioned as an ancestor. However, there is an even more prominent example. The Esterházy family, famous not only for the delicious cake that bears its name, claimed around 1700 to be descended from Vlad the Impaler. They even commissioned an impressive painting of the voivode, which presents him as, quote, the most ferocious enemy of the Turks. You know this portrait not only from the cover of the 2nd volume of Corpus Draculianum, but also from all history books, being the second most famous portrait of the Impaler, naturally, after the one in Ambras Castle. The Esterhazy family made the connection, ironically, through the same Nicolaus Olahus. His great-granddaughter had been the stepmother of Paul Esterhazy. This was a historical connection sufficient for him to be absolutely bursting with pride at being a direct blood descendant of the legendary Dracula. Even if he has no provable historical connection to Vlad the Impaler or other Basarabs, His Majesty King Charles III has no fewer and close personal ties with Romania. We're deliberately putting aside for a moment the kinship with the Romanian royal house, because all the various crowned heads across the European continent are in one way or another related to each other. Since the 90s, then Prince Charles has been a vocal and steadfast opponent of the vampirization of Transylvania, meaning the hyper-commercial stereotyping of this historic region and of Romania as the mythical homeland of Count Dracula. Prince Charles also strongly voiced his opposition to the ridiculous Dracula Park project, which was a fraudulent scheme to build a kind of vampiric Disney park near Sighișoara. This location is widely considered to be one of the most beautiful historical cities in Southeast Europe and is recognized as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. Through the Mihai Eminescu Trust, Charles has invested heavily in the restoration and conservation of the old Transylvanian Saxon villages. Among these, Viskri, or Weissenkirch in German, where he also owns a house, is certainly his most successful project. This village is not only a model for international tourism, but also for the exemplary integration of the Roma, who have practically replaced many of the departed Saxons in an exemplary way. Viskri is also where I first began my academic journey. But that's not the reason, nor is it the high quality and strong palinka of the local Saxon innkeeper, for which I wholeheartedly recommend you visit it. With each generation, the number of descendants from a certain person practically doubles. Thus, in Germany, it's probably significantly more difficult not to be related to Charlemagne. Elites in general and royal monarchs in particular were almost inevitably predestined by their prestige, influence, connections, and mobility to have by a very considerable margin the most illegitimate offspring. We know, for instance, that Sigismund of Luxembourg, the King of Hungary, had over 40 illegitimate children. And that's only what reached the ears of historical witnesses. During their long campaigns or territorial visits, far from their residences, and the legitimate wives they married, usually not for love but for political and strategic interests, emperors, kings, and voivodes had many opportunities to visit the bedchambers of various minor country noblewomen, dark-eyed tavern keepers, or defenseless peasant women and flower girls by the roadside. These obscure connections, however, can now only be proven through DNA testing. There is a strong possibility that some of you are descendants of Vlad the Impaler, even if you have not had the resources to commission a detailed and intricate family tree, just like the British royals. Across all these generations, however, His Highness Vlad sends his regards, as he used to conclude his Slavonic letters, through me, his humble chancellor, and may God rejoice over you. Goodbye.